afternoon. For those of you who don't know, my name is Maya Karen. I run a fashion blog called Classically Kept. It does feature luxury, contemporary, and how to style, and now natural hair care. So if you are into any of those things, please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the notification bell. That way you will never miss a video. So today's video, short and sweet, we are going to talk about 6 reasons that you know it is time to trim your hair. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first tall tale sign is going to be single strand knots. Some people call them fairy knots. And as a natural, single strand knots or fairy knots, they're going to be hard to completely get rid of them. In order to combat them, a lot of naturals do stretch their hair. The reason why you get single strand knots is because as a curly girl, as a natural girl, your curls tend to, we all know about shrinkage, your curls tend to curl, or your hair goes up, but your curls tend to curl up on themselves. And then your ends are the most susceptible and they are the oldest part of your hair. So they sometimes will curl upon themselves. People call them fairy knots because it's like kind of like magic. We're not really sure how they happen, but they just do. But when I say fairy knots, I'm talking about excessive. If you have just trimmed your ends, or you think you've trimmed your ends, or let's go ahead and say if you have dusted, or if you have snipped off maybe like a centimeter of your hair, and then you see the fairy knots come back, or if you see it on just about every other strand, it's time for you to get a trim, okay? Because the fairy knots can lead to tangles, and we don't want that because tangles can lead to breakage. Number 2, which is the bane of existence for all naturals, it is the one thing that we cannot stand. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love my natural hair. I will never get a relaxer again, but it is the complete bane of my existence. It is probably one of the things, if not the number one thing, that doubles my wash time, because really it turns into a wash day. But the second, and I would probably say the most tall tale sign when you know that you need to trim your ends, is detangling. And what I mean by that is, if detangling is taking a very, 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 very long time, if it's taking you a long time, or let me give you an example. If detangling is taking you double the amount of time that it normally takes you, or if it's just becoming increasingly difficult, it's time for you to trim your ends, okay? Detangling is a must when it comes to being a natural, whether that be finger detangle, whether you use a Denman brush, whether you use a tangle teaser, whether you use a wide tooth comb. You need to detangle your hair in any 3 of those forms. But if it is becoming increasingly difficult for you to do that, then it's time for you to get a trim. The third one is going to be your curls. They are not as defined. So they're not as defined. They may look dull. Your hair may be a little stiff. And what I mean by that is for my women who do braid outs or twist outs, you will notice this even more. And I know a lot of women who do the braid out and the twist out, they will take the flexi rods and they will wrap their ends around it. But if your curls are not, as the girls are saying, if your curls are not curling, then it might be time for a trim. The ends of your hair are the oldest part. It's the part that you need to baby. It's the part that you need to watch out for. But because you're hanging on to those dead ends, your curls probably are not going to be as defined as they would be if you had fresh ends, okay? Which leads me to my 4th point and kind of tags along with that, your styling. If your styles are not coming out how they normally would come out, or how, shiny, how bouncy, it's stiff, it's kind of lackluster, it doesn't have any body to it, chances are you need to trim your ends. So if your curls are kind of, just laying there, or if your styles are not styling, again, as the girls would say, it's more than likely probably time for you to trim your ends, okay? Number 5, which is also a tall tale sign, I would probably say this one and detangling are probably interchangeable, the number 1 sign, and that is see-through ends. I get it, ladies and men, if you're watching, I get it. You've grown the hair, you want to hold on to it, it looks good, it looks long. Well, when you straighten it, it will not look good and it will not hold your style, but I get it. I used to be that natural who wanted to hang on to every single inch, every single centimeter that I grew. I grew it, so I'm keeping it. But I'm from my own experience. hanging on to see-through ends, hanging on to dead ends is actually going to be more to your detriment than it is going to be more for your benefit. And what I mean by that is see-through ends. We all know what the see-through ends look like. Of course, when your hair is either stretched or straightened, you will be able to see it even more. And a lot of people do the paper test, which is basically you hold up a white sheet of paper, it is blank, and then you put your ends right in front of it. If you can see through your ends, then it's time for it to go. And I know for me, I have gotten better this year with my trim. When I choose to trim my hair for my hairversary, which is in December, that will actually be my third trim. So my ends should be looking a lot better when it's time for me to trim my ends at the end of the year. But like I said, I used to be that natural that wanted to hold on to her ends. I am not anymore. As a matter of fact, when I do trim my ends, I trim a little bit above that because I want my ends to be healthy and full. Okay, but if you can see through your ends, it is time for a trim. I promise you, you will not regret it. Your detangling, your twist styles, your styling will be so much better. Okay, and also if you don't trim your ends, that can also lead to, like I said, the detangling process being so much longer. But it can also lead to the fairy knots and the single strand knots. But it can also lead to you losing hair that you don't need to lose. Because when your ends have the single strand knots in them, the fairy knots, and they're see-through, they start to fold up on themselves, and it's just a big mess, okay? Ladies, if I can't encourage you with anything else from this video, if you don't hear anything else from this video, if you can see through your ends, it's time to get rid of them, okay? The last one, and I'm going to explain it because some people are like, well, what do you mean? The last tip that I can give you for when it's time for you to trim your ends is that if you, let's say you have a braid or you have a twist and it is seriously tapered at the bottom, and I will see if I can find a picture and put it up here. Let me explain what I mean by this, because I have some twists or I have some braids that taper. The reason why I have twists or I have braids that taper is because I dust. If you are not familiar with dusting, people who are natural typically will dust in between their trims. Dusting is basically taking a strand of hair, taking a couple of strands of hairs, or taking a twist or taking a braid and just kind of looking at it. And if the end looks a little wonky or if it looks a little dry, then you just kind of snip that off. And I do that every so often when it comes time for me to reinstall my mini twist. And the reason why I'm saying to you is that for me, that's not a tall tale sign, because let's say, for instance, I have a twist right here. I look at it and let's say I cut off like a half of a centimeter and I chop that off. The next time I come to this section to do my twist, it's not necessarily going to be the same amount of hair, so it might taper off a little bit. What I'm saying is that if you don't typically wear your hair in mini twists, or if you don't wear them in braids, or if you typically wear your hair out and then you go in with a pretty good section and the braid or the twist tapers off drastically, it might be time for a trim, okay? So take that one kind of with how you style and how you wear your hair. If you wear your hair in braids and if you wear your hair in twists and you see a little bit of taper, it's probably not so much that you need a trim, it's just that you're taking hair from different portions of your head. If you wear your hair out or if you wear it in different styles and things like that, and then you actually put a braid in your hair or a twist in your hair and you can seriously tape and it seriously tapers off, more so with a braid, not so much with a twist, but you can definitely tell with a braid that if it is a drastic taper, more than likely you do need a trim, okay? So like I said, really short and sweet, I just kind of wanted to give you like an overview of some signs of when you need to trim your ends. If you want me to go a little bit more in depth through each one, I can. If you want me to do a video on dusting, because like I said, I do dust in between my trims, let me know. I just want to remind you that here on YouTube, I do upload videos every Wednesday and Sunday. And of course, you know, right here, I'll put my Instagram handle. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, you guys. Bye.